Hello and welcome to our presentation for the World Economics Cup final. We are team number one from Latvia. Our names are Christian Stimeranis, Daniels Kruglos, Dmitrijs Mironovs, Viesturs Kalis, Rafaels Magnits, and Raivis Vošs.
As cities expand, land becomes increasingly scarce and expensive. For traditional farms, this is a major problem because they rely on large tracts of land as a key input. When land prices rise, so does the opportunity cost of using it for farming instead of more profitable urban development. Vertical farming, on the other hand, uses land far more efficiently. By growing crops in stacked layers, it can produce large yields in a very small area. This means that even as land prices climb, the overall production cost per unit remains relatively stable. So, in terms of economic viability, rising land costs make vertical farming more attractive, while traditional farming becomes less competitive. Essentially, vertical farming transforms land from a fixed constraint into a more flexible and efficient resource. When deciding whether to expand, a company must weigh the costs and benefits carefully. On the cost side, there are capital expenses, such as building new facilities, installing lighting systems, and purchasing hydroponic equipment for the farms. There are also operational costs, energy use, maintenance, and labor, all of which can be significant, especially since energy prices can fluctuate. On the benefit side, the company might expect higher output, economies of scale, and increased market share. But these benefits only make sense if the additional revenue from expansion exceeds the additional cost. The firm should expand until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. That's how profit maximization occurs. If marginal revenue is higher than marginal cost, expansion makes sense. If it's lower, then it's better for the firm to hold off. One of the biggest advantages of vertical farming is its controlled environment. Unlike traditional farms, it isn't vulnerable to droughts, floods, or pests, so yields are more consistent. This stability in production translates into more stable prices for consumers. Because vertical farms are located within cities, they also shorten supply chains. That means fewer transportation delays, lower fuel costs, and less spoilage, all of which help prevent price spikes. Additionally, vertical farms can operate year-round, avoiding the seasonal fluctuations that often cause volatility in fresh produce prices. This makes the supply curve less responsive to external shocks, creating a smoother, more reliable market for urban food supply.
Impact of technological innovation in vertical farming. So at the beginning, vertical farming requires a very high fixed cost for automation systems, LED lighting, and climate control technologies. These investments create strong barriers to entry in this industry, meaning only large and well-financed firms can afford to operate efficiently. Once these firms expand, they benefit from economies of scale because their high setup costs are spread across this large output. In turn, that lowers their average cost per unit. From an economic perspective, these innovations improve production, efficiency, and shift the supply curve to the right, as seen in the diagram. As a result, the quantity increases from Q1 to Q2, and the price drops down from P1 to P2. This means it is favorable for consumers as they can benefit from cheaper and more consistent access to fresh produce. Over time, new technologies become more affordable and innovative. Innovation diffuses across the industry. Smaller producers may also be able to join the market. However, if access to technology and finances remains limited to only the big firms, big farms, the market will consolidate further. A few large integrated agritech corporations could dominate production, leading to an oligopolistic market structure. So overall, technological innovation in vertical farming brings efficiency and sustainability, but it also changes how the industry is organized from an almost perfect competition to this oligopolistic structure.
The city is facing a growing challenge: how to secure a reliable, sustainable food supply as urban populations expand and farmland becomes scarce. Vertical farming offers a promising solution by producing crops indoors, using stacked layers that require far less land and water while ensuring year-round yields. However, the main obstacle is cost. Building and maintaining large-scale vertical farms demand significant investment in infrastructure, lighting, and climate control systems. The city plans to launch a major vertical farming project, but the required upfront funding is equal to about 10% of its annual budget, and the full construction period would take 5 years. Because of this, the government cannot finance it alone and is seeking ways to share both cost and risk with others. Three main approaches have been proposed. The first one is a public-private partnership with subsidies to attract investors. Next, a cooperative model involving local farmers, businesses, and communities, and finally, a public investment platform allowing citizens to invest directly with tax incentives. Our task is to analyze these three options, evaluate their economic implications, and recommend the most effective solution for the city's long-term sustainability.
Okay, I'll be covering the first solution of attracting social capital or public-private partnership through subsidies. These subsidies are paid for only when verified milestones or production goals are achieved. For example, after some farm modules are completed or output targets are met. However, per unit subsidies or the government covering some of the high electrical costs is also possible. This system lowers the investment risk and the effective costs of capital, making participation faster and more appealing to private firms. The city ensures public goals and accountability, while private partners provide the funding and management and advanced technology required for building these farms. Private firms tend to operate more often than not more efficiently than a single centralized government. They face strong cost and performance incentives, and they might have former experience in project delivery and seek profit through innovation. They can often complete construction faster, optimize resource use, and implement energy-saving systems and automation, which helps the city reach its long-term sustainability targets. Short-term advantages include rapid and efficient project launch. There will be also fast local job creation, specifically in construction. The city also avoids taking the full debt burden while gaining progress towards food security and urban resilience. So it gets the benefit without the debt. However, subsidies must decline gradually as more farms are built and the technology becomes more commercially viable to avoid dependency on the subsidies and inefficient use of them. There are also risks, short-term budget pressure, and also high monitoring costs, which add to that because high monitoring costs are necessary for the distribution of these subsidies. The main risk is profit-driven behavior. For example, investors focusing on luxury crops or premium pricing. The benefits could also concentrate among the larger investors, which would undermine the social goals. So overall, this policy is a practical way to crowd in private capital while maintaining public control. And if the subsidies stay transparent and performance-linked, maybe even time-limited, it can combine the efficiency of private enterprise with the stability of government oversight. The diagram shows the market for investment capital in this hypothetical scenario. On the x-axis is the capital invested, which is financial capital. And on the y-axis is the required rate of return, which is like the amount the investors expect for their investment. Investors supply more funds at every rate of return with this hypothetical subsidy. So the supply curve would shift from S to S subsidy. The new equilibrium shows a lower required return as R new is lower than R equilibrium, and there is greater total investment. K new is higher than K equilibrium. So in essence, each euro of public support attracts multiple euros of private funding, which accelerates construction.
The second approach is a cooperative model involving local farmers, businesses, and community members, where the vertical farming project is owned and operated jointly by a coalition of local stakeholders who fund and govern the venture together. The city's role is to enable the collaboration within an organizational framework, seed funding, and legal guidance, while ensuring the community collectively steers the project towards the public goals. Economically, a cooperative means broad local ownership and shared rewards that can be returned to members or retained for future investment, aligning pricing and surplus policies with community needs rather than outside stakeholders. Profits can be redistributed to member owners as a patronage as patronage refunds or reinvested to expand facilities, improve technology, or subsidies access for low-income households, keeping benefits local and reinforcing food security objectives. This structure supports affordability and participation because members are both producers and beneficiaries, strengthening social buy-in for the city's food system. There are challenges, however. Raising sufficient capital for a citywide build can be difficult for small local stakeholders, which may limit initial scale and delay reaching the minimum efficient scale where average costs are the lowest. Inclusive governance can lengthen decision timelines, and starting smaller can leave unit costs higher in the short run until learning and scale effects accumulate towards the efficiency range at the cost curve. Targeted public facilitation can help bridge early gaps while preserving cooperative control and mission alignment. Now, turning to the supply and demand curve slide, the demand curve D represents the city's market demand for fresh produce and is held fixed here to isolate the policy's supply effect on price and quantity. The baseline supply S0 reflects market conditions before the cooperative, with the initial equilibrium where S0 and D interact at price P0 and quantity Q0. The cooperative adds local capacity and shortens supply chain, shifting supply rightward from S0 to S1, which moves equilibrium to an equilibrium with a lower price P1 and a higher quantity Q1, all else being equal. In plain terms, the co-op increases total supply available at each price, easing scarcity and raising throughput, which is exactly what the outward shift from S0 to S1 shows on the diagram.
Finally, Solution 3 proposes that the government establishes a public investment platform where citizens can directly invest in the city's vertical farming project. In this system, people contribute their own savings and the government provides tax incentives proportional to the investment amount, for instance, partial deductions or tax credits that reward participation. The purpose is to mobilize private savings, accelerate the project's construction, and broaden public ownership in sustainable urban development. There are several economic advantages to this measure. Firstly, public participation increases engagement and social trust. When citizens become investors, they develop a personal stake in the project's success. This strengthens community support and awareness of sustainable agriculture, which can raise long-term consumer acceptance of vertical farming products. Secondly, it provides fiscal relief for the government. By attracting private capital, the government can reduce its own direct expenditure and borrow less. This helps maintain fiscal stability. A heavy burden if financed solely by public funds. Thirdly, it encourages sustainable investment growth. Direct citizen investment channels idle household savings into productive urban infrastructure. However, the policy also involves notable drawbacks. One issue is unequal participation. Wealthier citizens are more able to invest larger sums, meaning the benefits of tax incentives would be concentrated among higher income groups. This can raise concerns about equity and inclusion. Another limitation is tax revenue loss. Because the government grants deductions of credits, total tax income may fall in the short term. Finally, there's a high monitoring demand. Without proper regulation, risks like fraud or misallocation of funds could undermine public confidence. Turning to the next slide of the economic analysis, the diagram represents the market for investment funds. On the vertical axis is the interest rate, the cost of financing, and on the horizontal axis, the quantity of funds available for vertical farming investment. The demand curve shows the project's need for capital. Demand remains constant here because the project's total capital requirement doesn't change immediately. The initial supply curve represents available funds before the policy. And then the supply curve shifts to S1, reflecting more citizen investment and higher willingness to supply funds when these tax incentives are offered. So the rate falls from R0 to R1 and quantity increases from quantity 0 to quantity 1. So in conclusion, Measure 3 effectively reduces the government's financial burden, accelerates project progress, and builds social cohesion by involving citizens directly in sustainable urban development. However, it requires careful oversight and equitable design to ensure that its fiscal and social benefits are broadly shared.
To conclude, after comparing all three solutions, our team recommends Measure 3 as the most balanced and future-oriented solution. It secures funding while empowering residents to become true stakeholders in the city's vertical farming initiative. With fair tax incentives and transparent management, this model combines financial sustainability with social inclusion, ensuring that the farms are built for the people and by the people. For success, the government must maintain transparency, efficient fund use, and regular communication to preserve trust and enthusiasm among citizens. Thank you.